Hello, my name is Alexandra Emanuele. I'm the digital content editor with GFSR. Today, I will be speaking with Neil Coole. Neil is the director for food and retail with BSI Americas. He is a BSI subject matter expert and has more than 23 years of experience working in developing standards, testing, inspection, and certification. So thank you so much for speaking with me today, Neil.
Pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.
So we were chatting about these new standards that BSI has been developing quite rapidly just before we started recording. And I think that my listeners will be really curious to hear about the standards and their impact on worker safety and the safety of food. Can you tell me a little bit more about that, please?
Sure, yeah. So one of the things that we've noticed and BSI has been actively working with industry to support is, as a result of the pandemic, the prioritization of people. So making sure that we prioritize our people, keep the people safe, both physically and also mentally. Because if we can't keep the workforce safe, then food safety standards become redundant quite quickly because there's no one there to follow the best practice frameworks that exist today. So last year, BSI worked with a number of industry stakeholders to produce a seed document, which was a safe working guideline during the COVID-19 pandemic, which was then adopted within about a 3-month period, which is a record time for an ISO standard to be created. And it's an ISO standard, so it's called ISO PAS 45005, and it's the guidance document to support industry, all industry, in safe working best practices during the COVID-19 pandemic. So organizations are now using that today to help implement the best practice frameworks to ensure that they are doing what's needed to keep their people safe, to keep any site visitors safe, demonstrate a level of confidence and trust to their workforce, and showing that people must come first. And then off the back of that, another standard has been launched recently. And our subject matter expert at BSI, Kate Fields, has done a fantastic job of getting out to industry, is around ISO 45003, which is all around managing psychological risks in the workplace. So looking at worker mental well-being, so physical well-being as well as mental well-being, because of the stresses that we've really seen as a result of the pandemic. But ultimately, the theme is to keep people safe. If we can keep people safe, then they can focus on producing safe products. And obviously the retail industry and the food industry is now a frontline industry. So, you could have argued pre-pandemic, somebody stocking shelves in a retail environment might not have been seen as a frontline worker. Well, they are now. And if we can't keep those shelves filled, then things fall over quite quickly. So people have to come first, and our role is to support industry with those best practice frameworks to follow, and then provide the guidance and support moving forward to ensure that they focus on continuous improvement. And then food safety standards would obviously be an incredibly important part once you get your workforce safe. And then one of the other points that we've been doing a lot of work in lately, so we're in the process of developing a practical guide to a culture of food safety. And we're doing that with the technical author, which is Lone Jesperson from Cultivate, who's the co-author of the GFSI position paper. And we actually finished a steering group meeting quite early today with a global community of subject matter experts, and that's progressing nicely as well. So we hope to have that ready for industry later this year, if not early next.
Absolutely, very important work and standards that you've been creating, and absolutely important for moving forward past the pandemic. How do you see these standards potentially, I know you just created them, but either evolving into the future or just continuing past the pandemic?
So it's a really good point, Alexandra. So the point that we've seen industry really making better use of is standards before was something that organizations would focus on meeting. I must pass the audit, I must get my certificate, I must show that I've got a food safety standard in place. And as we said, the pandemic has certainly amplified the need to protect your workforce. So there are 3 key guidance, let's call them guidance documents or how-to guides, because the standard seems very rigid, whereas they're not designed to be. So ISO 45001 is the standard to look at work-related incidents and risks. So keeping the physical workers safe, falls from height, working in confined spaces, combustible atmospheres, industrial asthma, noise, whatever it may be. Think of a physical risk that could harm a worker. Then you look at 45003, that's mental well-being and psychological risks in a working environment, whether you're working at home or working in a manufacturing plant. This is all about keeping your workers safe, inside their head, as it were. And then 45,005 is your best practice guidance around safe working during the COVID pandemic. So 45,001, 3, and 5 are there to be used by organizations. And if they use them effectively, the recognition that they'll gain through an annual audit program will be, very successful. Off the back of that, we are understandably seeing a greater need for organizations to embrace an effective culture of food safety. Regulation was passed a couple of months ago by Ursula von der Leyen in the European Union. It's now a regulatory requirement. If you are in the EU, you must demonstrate that you have a culture of food safety. So we've seen Codex adopting it. GFSI has obviously incorporated it in the race to the top. GFSI benchmark schemes now have it as clauses within the standard. So we're working to make sure that these standards, these best practice guidance documents, they're how-to guides. If you want to keep your workers safe from physical risks, it's a how-to guide. If you want to protect them from psychological risks, it's a how-to guide. And for a practical guide to a culture of food safety, food safety culture, I should say, that's been developed now. But again, they're how-to guides. And we are starting to see organizations see the value in using standards rather than having the mindset of I must pass this annual audit program. It's not being seen now as something you celebrate annually, like a wedding anniversary or a birthday or a festive season. It's something that people are seeing that needs to be ingrained into the DNA of the business. That
regular check-in, as it were.
Absolutely, absolutely. So something an organization can really own and make part of their DNA rather than the kind of perception that it's something you do once a year.
I'm curious, you're talking about a how-to guide, and I think it's obvious to a lot of people, physical well-being how-to guide, you make sure that the environment is safe for a worker, but a mental how-to guide for your worker, that seems a bit more complicated, a bit less intuitive. Can you provide maybe an example of maybe what the check-in or the standard looks like for that?
Yeah, so the standards are written to look at certain considerations. So again, the standard will never tell you how to do it. It will tell you what to look at. How you do it is ultimately up to the organization. Standards are not written to be, to kind of be used as a stick for the client to feel that they're going to fail from. So for 45,003, it sets out the requirements. So you'd have to start working with other parts of the business that they may not have had a lot of engagement with before. So look at your human resources department. That's the critical area moving forward now, giving your workforce a voice in which to raise concerns. I don't feel well, I don't feel safe, I feel stressed, or whatever it may be. Historically, that may have been seen as something that nobody really was given the chance to do, or if you raised your hand, it might have been seen as a sign of weakness. Now it's quite the opposite. So within BSI, for example, we have mental health first aiders. So we can raise our hand anytime we want, we can have a one-to-one conversation and just speak one-to-one with a trained expert within our organization. So organizations are seeing the value in having something similar to that, but using a framework that has been developed by industry experts who understand psychological risks. So as you quite rightly said, physical risks are easy to identify. I could be hit by this piece of machinery, exposed to moving machine parts. I could fall from height. I could be hurt in a confined working space, whatever it may be. You can mitigate those through a risk assessment program. The same can be applied for mental well-being and psychological risks by doing a risk assessment. Now, organizations have been, and we've seen this as at the start of the pandemic, they were focused on production speed. So workers were told, it doesn't matter if you're ill, you must come to work. And that's not been good for the industry because a sick worker coming into a close confined environment and spreading a virus with their workers and their colleagues has been quite negative. And we've seen no shortage of examples of that early on in the pandemic. So you've got physical risks, but you've also got mental risks going on as well. So people knowing that someone was symptomatic or asymptomatic coming into a workplace environment, that's not going to be a great situation for that worker to, they're not going to feel confident, they're not going to feel safe. That may affect the quality of their work, which may affect the safety of the end consumer. So now it's all about putting people first, people prioritization, making sure that organizations know that the guidance documents, the how-to guides exist, and that the expertise to use them effectively exists. It's simply about engaging, whether you need a consultant to help an organization design out those risks and implement those best practices, whether you want to be trained to do it yourselves, or whether you want to celebrate the fact that you're doing the right thing through a third-party assessment program. All of those solutions are on the table. It's simply use the standards and use them effectively to protect your people. And then once we got the people safe, then the food safety culture is obviously the next logical step. And that really supports the strategy, I would argue, pre-pandemic and post-pandemic from an industry perspective on the culture of food safety. People first, culture right, safe products.
Thank you so much for chatting with me today, Neil.
My pleasure.
It was a pleasure. It's been wonderful hearing about your new standards, your new how-to guides, and I'm looking forward to seeing them used in the wider world of food and retail.
Wonderful. Thanks for the opportunity.